All right, class. So you are doing environmental portraits or street photography for this assignment. And as you know, I teach two sections of this people photography, and I've taught this class for maybe 3 semesters now. And this assignment is almost always heavily weighted on environmental portraits, but it seems that this class had it pretty even between environmental portraits, which I'll critique first, and street photography. So I just love the different dynamics of classes. So that's interesting to me. So with our environmental portraits, it needs to be, as we've talked about, a clear subject in your frame, and we need to be learning about the subject. Something is relatable about the subject. Something tells us more about who the subject is. That's what we're looking for. So this first image is by Angelina. Of course, we'll look at this. Technically, you're at ISO 400, 250 millimeters, so a really long lens, f5.6 at 1/500th of a second. So you guys know I'm always on you about this. If you have a long lens that you're shooting with, you have to have a shutter speed that's faster than your focal length. And you've done that here. So 1/500th of a second allows you to hand hold this if you want. Now, looking at your subject, we can see that her leg is nice and sharp, but her face is moving. And we don't want to go 8-1. Let's go 2-1. You can see that that's not totally sharp there. And I don't think that's a focus issue. I think that's a movement issue. So her feet are totally sharp. Your 5.6 is going to be shallower because you're using a longer lens, but both of her feet are in focus. So I don't think that her head would go out of focus in that. I think it's just that even at 1/500th of a second, she's moving fast at this point. So you have a little bit of blur there. It's not terrible, but if you went to print this, it would show, and it wouldn't be a print that you would want to make very large. You have, I think you said your niece, as they're playing softball. That's clear on what's going on there. And then we look into the background, and that gives us more of an environment. So not only do we have her and her uniform on home base hitting or almost hitting a ball, or maybe just hitting a ball, or maybe the catcher just caught the ball. We also have what looks to be her teammates or another team waiting, right? We have these people in the background. They're watching what's going on. They have what looks like their game bags up here. This player like has her eye black on. She has her headband on. Like, we know these are other players, so we expect this is a tournament or something. And that gives us a lot more information. Just seeing her swinging the bat, even if she is in full uniform, that's one aspect of it. But having this involve other people and not just be a singular subject, I think really helps pull out that narrative. And then having the hand just popping out from the catcher, I think is great also. So the only adjustment I would make on this image is a faster shutter speed, which seems like impossible that she would move that fast. But as she's swinging the bat, that's a really fast movement. All right, this image is by Nick, and you're at ISO 640, 24 millimeters, so pretty wide angle for a portrait, f8 at 1/10 of a second. So that 24 millimeters allows us to see more of the environment, which is why you want to use a wider angle lens for environmental portraits or for street photography. But a lot of the environment that we're seeing with this subject is directly in front of her. Her phone or walkie-talkie, even this viewing and leasing guidelines, all of her information here, that's most of the environment that we need to see. It's also great to see this person over here, but they're much less important than she is. So pretty wide angle, but it allows us to see everything in the frame. I would adjust that aperture and allow the subject on the side to go further out of focus so you can have a faster shutter speed. 1/10 of a second is tricky to hand hold. She's in focus, but we are seeing digital noise on her face already at 640. So you would want to open up that aperture, have a faster shutter speed, and bring down your ISO. So both of those could be accomplished by opening this up to, you have a 1.4 lens, you don't want to go that wide, but that would also allow us not to have to see what's in the background, which I find to be a little bit distracting. This car in the background, the house in the background, I don't find distracting, or the plants, but this car I do find is a distraction. So are we learning about our subject? Yes, we're seeing that they're working in an office, that they're customer facing. We see one person with a mask on, and then she doesn't have a mask on. I know you said that was for the picture, that she wanted to smile for the picture because she enjoys her job, and you asked her if she wanted to take off a mask. We can see her mask just to the bottom side of this image here. This space is for rentals for an apartment complex, I think you said. And we have little hints of that, but only because you told me. So the little hints are this viewing and leasing guideline, and then the fair housing sign that's put back here. Other than that, I'm not really able to tell what she's doing. And I wonder if beyond an office job, if it's important what type of office job she has, and if there are more ways you could tell us about that. I think that would be interesting to see a little bit more of what her work actually is. This image is by Siyue, and you're at ISO 3200, so a really high ISO here. And if we get closer, we can see that digital noise here. So you want to avoid shooting with that high ISO. You're shooting with a longer lens, 85 millimeters, that's great. F20 gives us the most amount of depth of field in this image, and we don't need that much depth of field in this image. So I would open up your aperture to allow more light in. And by doing that, you'd have a faster shutter speed. Right now, as we look at this, you have a lot of depth of field. We know with that F22, but your subject isn't in focus, and that's because there's motion blur happening there in 1/10 of a second. So you would really benefit from changing where you're adding light. Instead of adding it with the shutter speed, add it with the aperture. Now, the other thing is we want this to be an environmental portrait. We want to see, by looking around your subject, we want to learn about your subject. We want to see objects that are telling us more about your subject, and you're not giving us that in this image. Here we just have the greenery around her, and that's not telling us more about your subject. She's not dressed in a way that we think she's out on a hike. So we really need to marry that idea of the environment and a portrait a little bit tighter here, so that the environment is telling us more about our subject. And then this is the last image that we have for this. This is by Angie. She's at ISO 100, 55 millimeters, f4 at 1/200th of a second. So here, let's just compare this. You're f4, so you have a shallower depth of field. The background goes out of focus, but that allows you to be at 1/200th of a second. Where here, you could exactly have that sort of switch, right? Where your aperture was much wider, and then your shutter speed would be faster. All right, Angie, so your settings all look great here. The number one thing that stands out to me in this image is the light on your subject. So I'm assuming they're just in open shade. They're working at this garage. I don't remember if you said they owned it or if they just work there, but it's an important part of their life. They spend a lot of time here. And I'm assuming you just open the garage door, and that open shade is just beautiful light on your subject. It gives a catchlight in his eyes. It illuminates him in a really pleasing way. He stands out from the background. As we know, the rule of lighting is that it's going to fall off again and again and again behind him by multiples. So that background starts to get pretty dark. But I think if it was as bright as he is, we'd be overwhelmed with this picture. There'd be way too much detail everywhere. But having it in the darkness back here, it has a little bit of light from the fluorescent light here. We can just see these are all these, it looks like liquids that he would be using. And then we see all of his tools here. We see the cords and the hoses over here. We see his mask here. I wish I could see more of this tank that's right in front of him. We see the tires up above. So we know we're in an auto body shop. and we can see all of the tools. We don't even need to see a car to understand what we're looking at here. So this is a great environmental portrait. I wonder if you could scoot back a little bit and shoot this as a vertical shot instead of a horizontal shot, maybe cropping in about here. So we're not seeing these hoses, which I actually really like the marrying of the blues in this and bringing that together. But by cropping it and having it as a vertical, maybe we could see more of your subject and still hold on to the tires. The tires are really important in this for us to understand what we're looking at, right? And that we're in an auto body shop. But I'm so curious about that tank, and just seeing more of his figure, I think, would help balance this image out a little bit. But beautiful light on this, great environment, and a really good balance you have between your subject and the environment.